Welcome everybody to today's very exciting Monday Lunch Live session for the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which our presenters and all of you are located, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today we've got an exciting Monday Lunch Live for you. My name is Professor Grant MacArthur, and I'm the Executive Director of the VCCC. And before we get started, I'd just like to give you a little taste of what we've got coming with our online events for VCCC. Of course, in the current environment, all of our educational and seminar programs are being delivered online, and you can see that coming forward we have hot topics including circulating tumour DNA and RNA, and also impact of COVID-19 on cancer clinical trials in Victoria. So today's session, like all of our Zoom-based webinar sessions, we want to be very interactive, and there's a variety of ways for you to ask questions of our speaker and be involved in the dialogue. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can go to participants and raise your hand, or enter questions into the chat. So please, we very much want this to be interactive sessions, so please ask your questions. So today's topic is a really exciting one. I think I've used the word exciting twice already, but to reinforce that, the topic of social network analysis. And I'm so thrilled to be joined by Professor Dean Lusher, from the Swinburne University of Technology. So Dean is a social network researcher and a professor of innovation studies at the Centre for Transformation Innovation at the Faculty of Business and Law at the Swinburne University of Technology. And Dean is head of the Social Network Research Lab. And it's a research team that has a leading and international reputation in development and application of statistical models for social networks. And I think we've seen over the last 24 hours quite a lot of talk about statistical models of the way that Victorians interact with each other. However, there is a lot more to social interaction, of course, than what is occurring or not occurring, as it is the case at the moment during our COVID-19 lockdown. And social networks are very dear to the heart of VCCC, an alliance network that is looking to make difference to cancer patients through linking people and institutions together. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dean, and very much look forward to today's webinar. Dean, thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant, and thank you for the invitation to present today. It's a great pleasure to be here. So I am a professor in the Centre for Transformative Innovation, and I wanted to talk to you about a particular approach, social network analysis, and talk through the theory, the method, and the application of social network analysis for you. So right now, whether you like it or not, whole world is playing this game, pandemic. And I guess with distancing and isolation, the world is seeing probably the biggest network intervention it has ever seen. This is, I guess, a network intervention is where people's social connections to others are altered, with the idea that this is trying to stop COVID-19 spreading around the world. And so social networks are more important in a way than they have ever been, probably in our lives right now. Now, the Victorian government has suggested by staying apart keeps us together. Relationships are fundamental to being human. Romantic relationships, family, friends, work colleagues, communities, Relationships underpin our everyday lives in almost everything that we do. And this is why social media is so popular. And this is why solitary confinement is one of the worst punishments you can give a person. To be human is to connect, and those connections bring us benefits individually. They can bring us joy and happiness, but they also bring collective benefits. Together we can do things that we could not do alone, and the VCCC is a shining example of that. But right now we're being told to keep apart, to distance. And so let's have a look at social network analysis and how its utility and how it might operate in the current climate of COVID-19, but also be useful for a range of other activities. So I'm sure everyone who's worked in an organisation has seen some form of organisational chart, and this is usually put up online or on the wall somewhere, and it structures the sort of formal interactions that people have. But organisations also have one of these, and this is these informal networks and how work informally gets done. And social network analysis is very explicitly about understanding these informal connections that happen between people, because we know the whole world doesn't just follow the formal structure, but people may be friends with their boss or their boss's boss, and so different sorts of interactions might take place. And how do these formal and informal networks work together? We can use social network analysis to begin to understand and map out these informal social relationships. So this gives us a network science of connection. Now, a few terms here. These dots that we have on the screen, the different coloured dots, represent actors or nodes. These could be people, they could be teams, organisations, countries. It's a flexible framework for looking at connectivity. Then these lines between the nodes represent different sorts of relationships, and we need to be quite explicit about the sorts of relationships that we're interested in. It could be trust, advice, collaboration. It might even be disagreements. Not all relationships are positive. And the arrows can represent directionality. Here, number 8 chooses number 27 as someone they go to for work-related advice, but there's no arrow going back in the opposite direction. So there's a flow or a directionality for some networks. Importantly, social network analysis is not just a method, and let's go into some of that detail. But to begin with, let's have a look at one of the great features of social network analysis is the visualization, the picture that tells 1,000 words. And here we can see very clearly the difference between two organisations and the communication between the different units within those organisations. The different colours here represent different units or departments within that organisation. And on the left, we can clearly see that much of the communication is within unit and not across units, but that's quite different from the collaboration on the right, where there is within, but also across unit collaboration. Some work that I've done with the AFL, looking at their after hours socialising. Here is a network of AFL players, a team with the dots representing the players. And what we can see here is that there are some critical connectors within this team. Here are 3 players that, if they were to be traded or to retire or for other reasons leave the team, then this network becomes separated. This team essentially becomes 2 disconnected teams, which is not what you want for a football team. If we think about diversity management, we can talk about quotas and the percentage numbers of people from different backgrounds within an organisation. That's one way of looking at it, but also where are these people? Are these people central and connected and well brought into the organisation, or do they sit on the periphery? Network analysis gives us a way of looking at these issues. Now, here's some of the clients and partners we've worked with over time, and I believe what's interesting here is there's quite a diversity from government departments to the AFL to aerospace manufacturers to small to medium enterprises, health organisations and so forth. Anywhere where we have interactions between people are places where network analysis could be quite usefully applied. So I wanted to focus on three key issues, and that was the theory, the method, and the application of social network analysis. Commencing with the theory, we can think about different types of relationships and how they might operate differently or give us different benefit. But importantly, often they're very much overlapping in that we have what's called multiplex relationships, where we might have trust and advice and communication all overlapping into one. But I guess in particular today, I wanted to look at this idea of the formation of connections. So how do network ties form? And we've got some discussions about this. They may come about through obligation or self-interest circumstances, but unlike Facebook or LinkedIn, where we might be very deliberate about who we try and link with, sometimes our social world beyond those areas, ties come about in many and different ways that we might not be aware of. A key issue for networks is dependency, and what creates that dependency are these connections between those dots, those people. Our relationships to one another shape our interactions and can shape our outcomes. Now, to give you a very clear example, you may or may not remember this character from Pulp Fiction. Jules, I believe his name is, and he's got many great quotes, but only one of which I think I can repeat in this seminar, and that is him talking about hamburgers with his colleague and the metric and imperial system of the quarter pounder or the royale with cheese. And he ends up by saying, of course, me, I don't really eat hamburgers anymore because my girlfriend's vegetarian. So that sort of makes me vegetarian too. And what this does is, I guess, highlights very, very clearly that we all have our own motivations, our own desires, our own attributes and skills, and they can shape our behavior. But it's also our connections to other people that can impact on the behaviors that we have. Our connections fundamentally matter to us and the ways that we behave. Now, to take this idea of theory, from the abstract, we're not talking about, yes, abstract theories that are just the concerns of academics, but we have theories about how we form ties to other people, and we use these every day. If we look at this list here, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. A friend of a friend is a friend. The broker, wisdom of the crowd, birds of a feather. All of these are, I guess, theories about how people connect up and why they connect to other people. And these theories, these small theories of how we form ties, can be represented in network terms as network structures that we can see. And if we put all of these together, what we come up with are these informal social networks. So we've got a repertoire of theories that we may draw upon every day in our interactions with others. And we can think of these as social processes, our theories about how social connectivity comes about. Of course, there are a range of different sort of theories or micro theories about connection and how it might be important. So let's discuss a few others of these. This strength of weak ties argument is based on the view that some relationships are stronger than others. And we can have strong ties to some people and weak ties to others. And I guess a property of the strong ties is that they're more likely to join up. So if you think if you have a great friend from your sporting club and then you have a great friend from work and you want to get them together, you hope that they connect up. And if they don't and they don't get along, then that can be quite stressful for people, produce psychological strain. So this idea that for our strong ties, we are expecting that there is some closure. This idea of a friend is a friend and that they form up some sort of connectivity. So our connections to others bring about this formation of ties. But this same tendency doesn't apply to weak ties because there isn't that same obligation and same push for this to happen. So what happens here is the result is that strong ties tend to cluster, so group up into cliques, whereas weak ties will not. Now, this can be quite important for collaboration and innovation. We're talking about a global network structure that will tend to have strong tie cliques connected to weak ties, connected up by weak ties. And here we can see this bridge between different strong tie groups. So it is without the weak ties that the network would be disconnected, that information would not flow freely, and that innovations would be difficult to spread. Within the clique of the strong ties, information travels very quickly because everyone is connected to one another. But the weak ties enable the new information to come from outside, and hence why we say the strength of weak ties. Of course, there are other elements that might be important, and we could think of Burt's structural holes. Those are people who join up different groups of people. They bridge an information gap between different groups. In this example, node number 1 comes in to link up two disconnected groups. And if we think of entrepreneurs in this way, the word entrepreneur is made up of two French words, entre, in between, and prendre, to take. Excuse my French for those who can actually speak the language. But it's the person in the middle who takes. And this idea is something that structural holes get at. If we combine a few different ideas, we may think about social capital. So it exists and it's a resource. It means that people's relationships can give them, I guess, some advantage because of where they are situated in a network and the resources they can draw on. And work from Coleman has talked about this idea of cliques or strong connectivity being bonding social capital, while Burt has referred to structural holes as bridging social capital, bringing sort of disconnected elements together. And of course, it may be that we have both of these elements together, the strong bonding, the strong ties that allow us to trust and to share and get things done, but also the weak ties that bring us new information new resources that we wouldn't otherwise get. A further, I guess, network concept that's quite important is this idea that our number of network ties are important. And we can think of this as a degree, so the number of connections we have. And clearly, anyone on Facebook who wants to get more friends, the idea is that you're increasing your number of connections. Now, some people can have a high degree centrality, others might have a low degree centrality, so they're not connected to many or any others. So the number of connections can be quite important. But beyond this, it may be that it's not just your number of connectors, but I guess you can have other sorts of centrality. This person in the middle here has what's called high betweenness centrality, because they connect up one side of the network to the other. And without them, lots of information wouldn't get from one side of the network to the other. So they have this flow-on effect, and this can be useful, particularly in the current climate if we're thinking about disease spread. Who are the people who might connect up different and disparate groups? A final concept I'd like to talk of is homophily, this idea of birds of a feather flock together. And here we can see that very clearly different groupings by ethnicity for different high school students and who they interact with as friends. I'd now like to turn to method, which is a very important component of network analysis. And one of the key issues is that network data have a distinctive feature, and that is that in order to, I guess, map out these networks, we can't have these anonymous surveys or whatever. We need to know who the social units are to connect them up so that we can join up these dependencies. Now, if you're anything like me, you're wondering, you will have already bought all of your Burt Sutton paraphernalia, and you'd be hoping that the end of stage 4 lockdown happens soon so that we can actually meet the great man in person. Now, I guess here's a little tip for you about how to increase your chances here. So we've got two situations where situation A and situation B, and the red line indicates the person who would like to meet Burt Sutton in person, obviously with a mask on and social distancing, of course. But in these two scenarios, my question to you is, under which scenario are you more likely to meet Burt Sutton? And a clear answer, I think everyone would agree, is B, where our odds would be increased, because if we already know the Premier and the Premier is connected to Burt, that's going to increase our chances of meeting Burt Sutton. So what this does is highlights the issue of dependency and the issue that we can utilise our social ties to build up connections. Importantly, in terms of analysis, we need models and we need approaches that can take those dependencies into consideration. And particularly, we need models that can simplify the complexity of that world, of the social world. On the left, we have a clear visualization, while on the right, we can see here that we really can't see what's going on just by looking at the visualization. Now, putting both the Burt Sutton example together and this idea of not being able to visually see what's going on, we need statistical models for social networks. And Swinburne and the team I'm part of are, I guess, world leaders in this space. what these models do, and I won't go through the maths for you, but they take into account the fact that if we do know the Premier, that we're more likely to form a tie with Brett Sutton than not. And what it does is pushes along or is a better method for analysing networks as opposed to standard statistics, which wouldn't differentiate situations A and B. I would say it would be equally likely to meet Brett Sutton, and just conceptually that doesn't make a lot of sense. So these models, I guess, take our network and break it down. Before, theoretically, we built it up into little processes. Here we can break it down and say, do we see more of these structures than we might by chance? And if so, what do they tell us? Do we find this sort of birds of a feather, flock together processes occurring within our network? Do we find that various high performers are more likely to receive social connection? So I guess these network models are like night goggles that help us see things we couldn't normally see, and do so in a way that take into account the dependencies that are in network data, the connections that are quite important. So let's get to a few examples. My first one starts with some work I did with the AFL. And if we just use standard sort of surveys and we disregard the network ties, what we do is we don't really understand the connectivity and its impact on these teams. So if we think about what these techniques do, if we run a survey and we ask people for their attitudes, we can get the average attitude and compare it to another average attitude of a team. Or we can look at these attitudes and then say, how do they interact with social relationships? So let's do that right now. First off, we have our standard approach for looking at 4 AFL clubs. And this work happened around the time there were a range of allegations of sexual assault by AFL players. Hence, some of the things that we look at here are pro-violence attitudes, homophobic attitudes, misogynist attitudes, playboy attitudes. And what we find is this, that on average, there are no significant differences or no significant associations between these 4 clubs. So when we take a standard approach to looking at them, the conclusion is all of these cultures are more or less the same across the clubs. Now, if we add in social network analysis, what we find is that relationships are really important and matter. And here we're trying to look at, what are the attitudes of the central or popular players within these networks. And the reason for that is that we can find who are the voices of the most connected are more likely to be broadcast and heard and accepted as the norm within these teams. So when we look at club by club, what we find is that in Club 1, players who strongly endorse playboy attitudes or a real man can get lots of women to sleep with him are more likely to be the central and popular and influential people within that club. But that's not the case at Club 2, and instead those who more endorse a violent masculinity are more likely to be the central and influential. The same happens at Club 3, but at Club 4, none of those factors are important, and indeed homophobic attitudes come to the fore. Now, it's interesting that for all clubs, if you're a best player or if you had played a lot of games, so you're an experienced player, you're also more likely to be central in the network, central and influential in all 4 clubs. But what differs is how the masculinity attitudes play out across the clubs. Some work on by colleagues of mine on French cancer research elites has shown, I guess, the following. So here we're looking at connections between laboratories, which are these blue squares. Then we have the red dots here, researchers and their advice networks. So who they go to for advice. Researchers are then affiliated with different laboratories. And then if we put all of that together, we have the researchers and the laboratories. And the overarching finding was that these advice-seeking relationships were only effective and increased the performance of individuals when there was also a formal connection between the laboratories at a top level. So without that sort of higher level agreement, the value for the researchers wasn't realised at the lower level interaction between the two. Similarly, if we're looking at global aerospace company, we're interested in what collaboration looks like for these and what impact it might have on project performance. So for this company, I guess we're looking at project affiliations, which person is working on which project. We can include these formal structures and reporting lines. We also put in their knowledge seeking relationships, so they're informal networks. People may be part of different communities of practice around various issues. Projects might also be linked and have some connectivity. And looking at this whole structure, we're able to apply statistical models to unpack and predict why some projects might be successful or not, depending on this overall system of interactions between these elements. And this may have impact on, I guess, team design and resource allocation for this company. Other work that colleagues have done in this same concept of networks is looking at the impact on the environment. In this particular case, overfishing. So there are networks of connection between farmers at one level, and then at another level, here we're looking at an ecological system of which species depend upon others. And as we can see, if there is a clear communication and cooperation between the fishers, they're able to be, I guess, more collaborative in how they go about fishing, which ones they might not overfish, and then place a much more coordinated effort to have better ecological outcomes. This is work by myself and other colleagues looking at a small to medium enterprise in Australia that does bespoke art pieces. What we've done here is look at the sort of quality information that flows within the organisation, but also asked about where quality wasn't as strong as it could have been, or there could have been better information flow. So the green lines represent the quality information, and the dotted red lines indicate where better quality information is required. Now, the so what here is that we're always being told, well, we need to improve our communication, we need to communicate more. This analysis shows us that there is much good communication going on between many of the different units, but there are a few points such as project management and business development who are two key areas where communication could be improved. And so this, I guess, puts a focus on, if we're going to add resources, project management and business development would certainly be areas that could do with assistance. A further example is the boards and directors. A few years ago, and for quite some time, there has been a push to increase the female representation on Australian boards to a minimum of 30%. Unfortunately, and this target was set for 2019, and it, I believe, and it was not met, unfortunately. Our analysis here, we can see stereotypical gender colours used here, but the different networks of boards and how they interlock, and the fact that most of the boards have 86% are all connected up in this ASX top 200. What we found, though, were boards who were more likely to have achieved the target were connected by people who sat on another board who had already achieved the target. So it seems like there's a sharing of information about reaching this 30% female representation target, and that information would flow from one board to the other in positive ways. Okay, just two further slides that I wanted to speak to was this idea of contact tracing, and where our team at Swinburne are about to begin assisting the Health and Human Services on some of the work that they're doing in this space. So providing some, I guess, conceptual and analytic support. Now, there may be, you've heard of this idea of a super spreader, so someone who's highly connected to others. And, you know, we discussed this before as a degree centrality or number of connections. Now, that may be important, but we can see here this super spreader is connected into just one group of people. But if we think quite differently, it might not necessarily be the number of connections, but the fact that these people may span across different sorts of groups. So they are a boundary spanner who connect up otherwise disconnected groups. And so it may not just be that these people with lots of connections are important, but indeed it's how those connections are structured that is important. Finally, I just wanted to advertise this project, the Optimise study, run by led by the Burnett and the Doherty Institute, who are leading this sort of 12-month study looking at adherence to distancing, isolation within Melbourne and the wider Victorian community. And I guess it's a study that looks at how COVID-19 may spread through social contacts, but it also looks at well-being and social support and people's ability to successfully isolate or distance from others, and what are the factors and drivers that may make that easier for some people or may make it more difficult for others. So this study is about to commence next week. This website may not be live yet, but it will be anytime soon. And it's quite a large project, and probably, or not probably, it is definitely the largest social network project ever undertaken in Australia. Before I wrap up, there's a range of network researchers in Australia, and if you're interested, you can reach out to them through the Australian Network of Social Network Analysis. And further, I'd like to promote the Sunbelt 2022 conference that will happen in January 2022. This is the world's premier social network analysis conference coming to Australia. It's the first time in the Southern Hemisphere and only the second time ever outside of North America or Europe. So it's a very exciting time for network researchers to join up. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Dean. Really interesting webinar, and questions are rolling in, so let's just jump straight into it. So first question is, how could cancer researchers use social network analysis to increase dissemination and impact of their research?
I guess that would depend on where they would like to disseminate that information. If it was to other researchers or to the general public, there may be different sorts of strategies. You know, I think connecting up is, you know, obviously an important element here, but maybe if the questioner could give a little more specificity on where that might be disseminated, that I could more readily answer that question.
Yeah, just to I might just follow up on that question.
Sure.
Too, if I may, Dean. So, you obviously are taking in a robust statistical model to social networking. So, do you think in publication data with citations of work, for example, one could use social network analysis to actually hypothesize that collaborative research is of higher impact than, you know, than more focused or siloed research?
Yeah, thank you for that prompt, Grant. Yes, it's definitely the case, and we have research in our centre being done on that particular area. So, you know, citations are one aspect. The citation of patterns as well is another sort of area where network research can come into play, and have a Jean-Francois Devine, PhD student, looking at, I guess, bringing different knowledge domains together and the sort of through collaboration and analysis as well.
Excellent. So there's a couple of questions coming through about the Victorian fascination with the AFL. So
yes.
I'm sure many people are envious of you to try to dissect what makes AFL football clubs tick.
Yes.
So, you know, one question is around some of the challenging themes that you've tackled in that one study you presented there. And the question is about how you go about giving honest feedback to those clubs, given issues around anonymity and potentially privacy issues.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's, I guess, in the way that we provide feedback is we take people, well, we invite people to participate on the proviso that we won't identify them individually to the organisation, and this gives us, I guess, buy-in. You know, and we explain it a bit like a doctor has to know who you are to treat you, but once you leave their room, that they don't go around and tell everyone about your private information. So keeping that in mind, we're able to give feedback, and I guess as a network analyst, I'm rarely interested in, you know, particular individuals, but more the overall patterns that happen. So often people want to know who's this person and who's that person. I say, well, that's not the interesting bit. It's about how the system works together and the patterns of, you know, things that roll up. So we try and focus on that for, you know, the clubs or any organisation where we give the feedback.
Now, an interesting question from Megan Varlow. Thank you very much, Megan. around, has used the term culture, which I must admit is running through my mind as well. You know, thinking about how, you know, you might be able to use quantitative social network analysis and statistics to perhaps define culture. And Megan particularly is asking a very interesting question around healthcare settings. You know, there's, she says, we often hear of culture squashing improvement, and and wondered if this can be explored in the setting of healthcare.
I definitely think it could. My partner has worked in healthcare for a long time, so I've been very interested in anecdotally hearing the stories of cultures of various hospitals and so forth. I think what networks do is they shine a light on the sort of hidden and unspoken elements of within an organisation. And I guess networks can facilitate great things. They can facilitate collaboration and a whole range of positive outcomes, but they can also stifle change. And even though we might change the formal structure, if the underlying informal relationships don't move and attitudes don't change, then any sort of culture change attempt is going to fail. So understanding, you know, who are the views of those sort of informal leaders gives you a better starting point for where you might need to make change.
Thank you. So an interesting question on definition of dependency as weak or strong within, you know, networks. You know, are there criteria that can be used to define, you know, weak or strong dependencies?
That's another very good question. It is a difficult. I think strong and weak ties are used more conceptually, and they are difficult to measure in some ways. We can think about measuring the strength of ties in many ways. So we might ask who you go to for advice, and then there might be, you know, how valuable is that advice? So you could rate it, and you can make some cutoff on that. But so there are possible approaches, but it's not always straightforward.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions on quantifying the collaboration, you know, something sort of that we touched on a bit before. So, you know, are there good models using social network analysis? You could come up with a number of quantifying the breadth and depth of collaboration. And a lead on from that is, you know, could even such a parameter be used for funding agencies when they're assessing, you know, the both the outcomes, but also track records of researchers that are promoting collaboration?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, we have a number of projects looking at collaboration. We've looked at CSIRO Swinburne strategic collaboration and how they've worked together. We've done some work with Boeing and Siemens on similar issues. And we've currently got an ARC, we're part of an ARC training centre in the chemical industries based at the University of Melbourne as well. And that's all about measuring collaboration within, but also with industry. I think social network analysis is a great set of tools to understand any sort of centre of excellence or cooperative research centre or consortium of research together, and it's a great way of demonstrating how collaboration might build through that sort of connectivity.
Excellent. Now, an interesting question from Elizabeth Lopez. So Elizabeth asked, is it advisable to have a do-it-yourself social network analysis, and are there any models and tools available?
There are plenty of tools available, I guess, and you can do it yourself. A lot of the tools are directed for academics, so they're free software that might be a little quirky or clunky and hard to use, but there are other tools available. Clearly, it can get a little complex, so I guess researchers such as myself would, happily work with other people, but there are, I guess, more and more development of tools to look at these issues.
Yep. So keep in touch with yourself then for opportunities.
Well, yes. Thanks, Grant.
So question from, from Nathan. So could you briefly comment on advancement and progress of causal inference in observational social network analysis over the last decades? And the example he raises is differentiating social contagion from homophily.
Yes, very good question. There are a particular type of models, stochastic actor-oriented models that are longitudinal models, so they can unpack social influence from social selection, and they're, I guess, seen as the gold standard for being able to unpack the difference. Does the attitude make the tie form, or does the tie formation change the attitude? So, but you do need longitudinal data for to be able to look at those sorts of changes. Great.
So one of the things that really hits me from your presentation is what social network analysis can tell us about leadership and effective or less effective leadership. So a couple of scenarios to get you to comment on. One is a lot of the fascinating debate around political leaders and the response to COVID-19, where, there's been some contrasting, commentaries on leadership of politicians. The other scenario that I find quite interesting in social network analysis as applied to leadership is the concept that the pharmaceutical industry use of key opinion leaders, where they put quite a lot of effort into defining who they are and then trying to get them to disseminate and support information favourable to their products. So those couple of scenarios, any comments that you would make, Dean?
Yeah, look, I'll take the second one. Look, clearly, if opinion leaders, if people are highly connected, and we introduce the term, if they have a high degree, then they're able to disseminate their attitudes more. But there are other sorts of connectors who are important, such as the brokers, who may have very few connections, but can if they join up two highly influential individuals, then they're performing a different role. So I guess there are a number of important network structures, and it's not only just the number of connections. And the second aspect of that is that often when we get information, we triangulate, or we check that with other people. So we're not just going to take an opinion leader's opinion as gospel, but we might talk to our friend and say, did you hear, what this person said? What do you think of that? And we validate it with other people. So so I guess our ability to believe in that information, we check with other people around us.
Yep. And just to sort of maybe, I was going to use the term push you, but I don't want to push you, Dean.
Sure.
Thinking about the, political leadership, so and social media. So some political leaders have an absolute huge number of followers on Twitter, And I assume one could take such data sets and potentially do some analysis based on social networks as to how effective, leadership is. I assume that simple numbers of Twitter followers is completely an effective way of measuring effectiveness of leadership, but nonetheless, the data that's generated by those social media platforms could be, very interesting and powerful.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work being done, not by our group on these issues, but we have colleagues at the Oxford Internet Institute who are looking at these sorts of issues, and also other, there are Swinburne researchers doing the same. Clearly, the dissemination of information is really important, and Twitter is a very rapid mechanism for that. There's, in fact, some great work being done at the University of Melbourne, in fact, on this as well. So yeah, it's really important work how information diffuses and then I guess is taken up and accepted as well.
And for the researchers and clinicians and educators that are listening to the seminar today that feel a bit overwhelmed with the choice of social media platforms, any comments about, advantages or disadvantages of different platforms for effective social networks?
My advice is to, I'm not on any of these other than LinkedIn, I think, and that was forced on me from work. So the network analyst who doesn't use a lot of online network tools, but yeah, find it gives me a bit more time to do other stuff.
Well, my little anecdote in winding up before we thank Dean is I'm not very active on LinkedIn, but very recently I signed up to do some fundraising for Lifeline as a part of the issues with COVID-19 at the moment. And I just simply clicked on, to link my fundraising to LinkedIn, and I had like $1,000 in about 2 hours. I was really
That's great.
very, very impressed actually at how quickly, for that particular, audience for me to fundraise, how very effective that was. So look, Dean, that was absolutely fascinating. And I very much thank the audience as well for some absolutely terrific questions. I can tell from the questions that there'll be, a number of potential collaborations that people may be in contact with your group going forward. So just remains for me to thank you so much. Thank everyone for your participation in the webinar today, and we look forward to your participation in some of the fascinating topics going forward in the VCCC webinar series. So thank you everybody, and special thanks to Dean.
Thank you very much, Grant. It was my pleasure. Thank you everyone. Bye.